The advertisement had been direct, written in Arthur Thorne's plain, blocky script. Cook wanted. Sober habits. Hard worker. Room and board provided. He had paid the man at the territorial newspaper in Cheyenne $3 to run it for a month, his last $3 until he sold his next head of cattle. He expected a stout widow, perhaps, someone with calloused hands and a no-nonsense demeanor who knew her way around a wood stove and a side of beef. He needed competence, not conversation. The silence of his ranch in the Wyoming Territory was a familiar weight, and he had no desire to change it, only to have a decent meal at the end of a 16-hour day. Therefore, when Henderson's freight wagon crested the dusty rise a week later, Arthur watched from his porch with a sense of grim satisfaction. The help had arrived sooner than expected. He wiped his hands on his canvas trousers and walked down to meet the wagon, his boots sinking into the thick dust that coated everything he owned. But as the wagon rattled to a halt, the person who emerged from beneath the canvas cover was not a stout widow. She was a young woman, slender and straight-backed, wearing a dress of dark blue silk that seemed to drink the harsh afternoon light and hold it as a deep, impossible jewel. It was a dress made for ornate tea rooms in San Francisco, not the grit and wind of a failing cattle ranch. Her black hair was coiled in an intricate knot, and her face was a pale, still oval. In her arms, she cradled a squirming ball of golden fur, a puppy, no more than a few months old, its tail thumping a frantic rhythm against her silk-clad arm. Arthur stopped dead. He stared from the woman to the puppy and back again. This was a mistake. A profound, expensive mistake. Henderson, a man whose face was a roadmap of hard trails, climbed down from his seat. He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "This is the Thorne place," he grunted, not as a question but as a declaration of a job finished. "It is," Arthur said, his voice tight. "But there's been an error. I sent for a cook." "Got a letter for you," Henderson said, ignoring the protest. He reached into the wagon and produced a sealed envelope and a small, leather-bound trunk. He dropped the trunk in the dirt with a thud. The woman flinched but did not speak. Arthur took the letter. It was addressed to him in elegant, looping script. Inside, a note from a man named Mr. Chen, a matrimonial agent in San Francisco, explained the situation with infuriating politeness. It seemed there had been a fortunate misunderstanding. Mr. Chen had interpreted his advertisement not as a request for an employee, but as a lonely homesteader's humble plea for a wife. The young woman, Miss Mai, was from a very respectable family and had agreed to the arrangement. Her passage was paid. Her dowry, the letter implied, was the small trunk now sitting in the dust. The words blurred in front of Arthur's eyes. A wife. He had a ranch to save, debts to pay, and a winter coming that promised to be harsh. A wife was a complication he could not afford in time, money, or spirit. A wife in a silk dress who carried a puppy was a catastrophe. He looked at her. For the first time, her eyes met his. They were dark and unreadable, but in their depths, he saw not deception, but a profound and terrifying vulnerability. She stood alone in a world that was not hers, holding a dog as if it were the last piece of her old life. She was 22, perhaps, a girl playing at being a woman, sent across a continent on the back of a lie. "I can't," Arthur said, the words addressed to Henderson, to the letter, to the vast, indifferent sky. "This is, no. You'll have to take her back." Henderson laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Take her back? To where? Cheyenne? She got no people there. Next wagon heading west ain't for 3 weeks. You think she's gonna sleep in the street? She's your problem now, mister." He tipped his hat, a gesture devoid of respect. "The agent paid me in full." With that, he climbed back onto his wagon, cracked his whip, and rumbled away, leaving a cloud of dust and a silent woman in his wake. The dust settled, coating the hem of her blue dress in a film of gray. The puppy whined softly. Arthur felt a cold knot of anger and despair tighten in his chest. He was a plain man. He dealt with what was in front of him: sick cattle, broken fences, the threat of drought. He did not know how to deal with this. The simplest thing, the most logical thing, was to put her and her trunk in his own buckboard, drive her to Cheyenne, and leave her with the marshal or a church. It was not his responsibility. But then he looked at her again. She had not moved, had not spoken a single word. She simply stood there, a fragile statue of defiance against the endless brown landscape. To leave her in Cheyenne would be to abandon her. He knew what happened to solitary women in towns like that. His conscience, a thing he rarely consulted but could not ignore, balked at the thought. As he stood there, trapped between practicality and principle, another rider appeared on the horizon. This one was not a stranger. Fletcher Sterling sat atop a fine black mare, his clothes tailored, his posture ramrod straight. Sterling owned the sprawling ranch to the north, and he had been making offers on Arthur's land for a year, offers that were insultingly low. Sterling wanted his water rights, the only reliable spring in the valley. Sterling reined in his horse, his eyes taking in the scene with amusement. He surveyed Mai from head to toe, a slow, appraising look that made Arthur's hands clench into fists. "Thorn," Sterling said, his voice smooth as polished stone. "Decided to get some proper help, have you? Though I confess, she doesn't look like she's seen a branding iron in her life." The insult was clear, aimed at both Mai's delicate appearance and Arthur's presumed intentions. In that moment, something shifted in Arthur. Sterling's casual cruelty solidified his decision. To send her away now would be to prove Sterling right, to admit defeat not just to the matrimonial agent, but to the predatory world Sterling represented. It would be an admission that he couldn't even manage his own affairs. Arthur stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Mai. "She's not here for the branding," he said, his voice low and even. "Go on about your business, Sterling." Sterling's smile was thin. "Just being neighborly. A man in your position needs to be careful." Folks talk. He tipped his hat, a perfect mirror of Henderson's earlier mockery, and rode off. The silence that returned was heavier than before. Arthur could feel the weight of the entire territory settling on his shoulders. He was a man who prized his solitude, who kept his head down and his business private. Now, he was the subject of gossip, the fool who'd somehow acquired a Chinese bride by mistake. He turned to the woman. Her name was Mai, the letter had said. "You can't stay in the barn," he said gruffly. It was the only thing he could think of to say. He bent down and picked up her trunk. It was lighter than he expected. "The spare room is inside. It's clean enough." She watched him, her expression unchanged. Then, for the first time, she spoke. Her voice was quiet, her English accented but clear. "Thank you." She followed him toward the small, weathered clapboard house, the puppy trotting at her heels. As he opened the door, the scent of dust, old leather, and loneliness met them. He had made a decision on the spur of the moment, an act of defiance against a man he despised. But as Mai stepped across his threshold, he had the sinking feeling that he hadn't solved a problem. He had just invited a much larger one into his home. He thought this was a temporary arrangement, a matter of weeks until he could sort it out. He did not yet understand that the woman in the blue silk dress was not a mistake to be corrected, but a reckoning he never knew he needed. The first days were a study in silent, awkward collision. Mai tried to cook, as if to prove her worth for the position she was meant to fill. The results were disastrous. She approached the cast iron stove like a dangerous animal, her movements hesitant. The biscuits she made were dense, charred pucks that could have been used for target practice. The bacon was a greasy, blackened mess. Arthur, raised to never waste food, ate every bite without comment, the taste of ash coating his tongue. After the third day, he quietly resumed cooking their meals himself, making enough for two. She watched him, her hands clasped in front of her, her face a mask of quiet shame. She was useless in the kitchen, but she was not idle. While he was out mending fences or tending to the cattle, she began to transform the house. The thick layers of dust that had been his constant companions vanished. The grimy windows were scrubbed until the morning light streamed in, sharp and clear. She found a stash of old feed sacks and, with a needle and thread from her trunk, began sewing them into curtains. She moved with a silent, deliberate grace that was at odds with the ruggedness of the work. Her puppy, which she called Bow, or Treasure, was a whirlwind of clumsy energy. He chewed on Arthur's boots, dug holes in the small patch of dirt by the porch, and followed Arthur from the barn to the corral with unwavering devotion. Arthur, who had never owned a dog, found himself annoyed, then tolerant, and finally, quietly fond of the creature. Bow was a bridge between their two silent worlds, a living thing that demanded nothing but offered uncomplicated affection. One afternoon, Arthur returned from a long ride checking his northern fence line to find Mai on her knees by the porch, using a small trowel from his tool shed to turn over the hard-packed earth. She had planted something, a few small, green shoots. "What's that?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. "Ginseng." "And ginger," she replied, not looking up. "From my trunk. They need water. A lot of water." He grunted, but the next morning, he moved the rain barrel closer to the porch for her. It was a small gesture, but it felt significant. They were learning a language that had no words, a negotiation of space and need. The fragile piece was shattered a week later. Arthur rode out at dawn to find 20 yards of his fence cut clean through with wire snips. A dozen head of his cattle had wandered onto Sterling's land. It was a classic tactic, a way to levy fines or simply claim the strays. It was a direct, unmistakable threat. Fury, cold and sharp, called in his gut. He spent the entire day rounding up the cattle and painstakingly repairing the fence, his hands raw, his mind churning. He returned well after dusk, exhausted and grim, to find the lamp lit in the window. The sight of it, a warm yellow square in the vast darkness, sent a strange pang through him. It was the first time in 5 years that a light had been waiting for him. When he entered, Mai was sitting at the small kitchen table. A bowl of stew sat on the table, steam rising from it. It smelled surprisingly good. But her face was pale, her hands clenched in her lap. "Mr. Sterling was here," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Arthur's exhaustion vanished, replaced by a surge of protective anger. "What did he want?" "He said you were having trouble. That this land was too much for one man." Her eyes met his. "He said a woman like me should be in a town where she could be looked after. He offered me a job. In his house." The implication was vile and clear. Sterling wasn't just after his land anymore. He was trying to take everything. "What did you say?" Arthur asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "I told him I was where I was supposed to be," she said. Her chin lifted a fraction. "I told him that my employer was a good man, and that I did not require a new position." Arthur stared at her. She had faced down Fletcher Sterling, a man who made other ranchers tremble, and she had not flinched. She had defended him, his character, to his enemy. In her formal, precise words, she had drawn a line in the sand. He realized, with a jolt, that he was no longer just protecting her, she was, in her own quiet way, protecting him. The arrangement had felt like a burden, a problem to be solved. Now, it felt like an alliance. But he also saw the fear she was trying to hide. Sterling would not be deterred by a few sharp words from a woman he considered a curiosity. He had shown his hand. This was just the beginning. What he didn't know was that Mai's own secrets were far deeper and more dangerous than a cut fence line. The reason she'd faced Sterling with such resolve had nothing to do with loyalty to him, and everything to do with the man she'd left behind in San Francisco. That night, the air in the small house was thick with unspoken tension. The confrontation with Sterling had changed something between them, stripping away the pretense of a simple misunderstanding. They were no longer just a rancher and a woman who had shown up by mistake. They were two people in a house under siege. Arthur sat at the table, cleaning his rifle, the metallic scrape and click of the mechanism filling the silence. It was a routine task, something to occupy his hands, but tonight it felt different. It was a preparation. Mai sat across from him, mending one of his shirts by the light of the kerosene lamp. The needle moved in and out of the rough fabric with a steady, hypnotic rhythm. "You should not have done that," he said finally, not looking at her. "You shouldn't have spoken to him." "Should I have let him speak for me?" she asked, her voice soft but edged with steel. "He thinks because I am Chinese, and a woman, that I am a fool. He thinks I am property to be traded." Arthur stopped his work. He looked at her, truly looked at her. He saw the proud set of her jaw, the unwavering clarity in her dark eyes. He had assumed she was fragile, a piece of porcelain to be sheltered from the harshness of his world. He had been wrong. She was not porcelain. She was forged steel, wrapped in silk. "Why did you come here, he asked, the question blunt. "The truth. The letter from that agent, it was a lie, wasn't it?" She set the shirt down, her hands folding neatly in her lap. For a long moment, she was silent, and he thought she would not answer. Then she rose and went to her trunk. She opened it and removed a small, lacquered box. From it, she took a sheaf of thin, folded papers covered in elegant, flowing characters. She laid one of the letters on the table between them. "This is from my father," she said. "My family is not poor. They are in the shipping business in San Francisco. They have ambitions." She smoothed the delicate paper with her fingertips. "They arranged a marriage for me. To a man named Mr. Guer. He is their business partner. He is much older. He has buried 2 wives already." Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion, which made the words all the more chilling. "I refused," she said simply. "In my family, this is not done. It brought great shame upon my father. To refuse is to say he made a poor choice, that he does not know what is best. To defy him is to defy everyone." She paused, taking a breath. "But to marry Mr. Guer, that was a different kind of death. My father, he is a proud man, but he is not cruel. He would not force me, but he could not keep me. The shame was too great. So he found another way. He saw your advertisement. A man far away, in the middle of nowhere, who needed help. It was a way to send me away without disowning me. A new life, where my disgrace would not tarnish the family name. I was not sold, Mr. Thorne. I chose this. I chose you over him." The confession hung in the air, heavier than any threat Sterling could make. Arthur felt the entire frame of his understanding shift. She was not a victim of a clerical error. She was an exile. She had chosen this desolate, failing ranch over a life of wealth and misery. She had traded a gilded cage for a wooden one, but the choice had been hers. A wave of profound, humbling respect washed over him. He had been fighting to save his land. She had been fighting to save her life. "My name is Arthur," he said quietly. She looked up, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. "Arthur," she repeated, testing the sound of it. He pushed the rifle aside. "This ranch is barely making it," he admitted, the words costing him a piece of his pride. "Sterling has been trying to run me off since I got here. He wants the spring. Without it, my cattle won't make it through a dry summer." It was his own confession, his own truth laid bare on the table next to hers. For the first time, they were not a rancher and his mistaken bride. They were 2 people, bound by separate desperations, now facing a common enemy. The attack came 3 nights later. A low moon hung in the sky, casting long, eerie shadows across the yard. It wasn't Sterling this time. It was 2 of his hired hands, men with mean, narrow faces Arthur recognized from town. Bao started barking first, a frantic, high-pitched alarm that sliced through the night. Arthur was out of bed in an instant, pulling on his boots. He grabbed the shotgun from beside the door. Through the window, he saw the flickering orange glow. It was coming from the barn. "Stay inside," he ordered his voice sharp with adrenaline. But she was already at his side, a heavy iron skillet in her hand. Her face was set, her eyes wide but resolute. There was no time to argue. They burst out of the house. The men had thrown a torch into the open door of the hayloft. The dry hay was catching, flames beginning to lick up the old, dry timbers. The smell of smoke and fear filled the air. One of the men turned, surprised to see them. He raised a pistol. Arthur didn't hesitate. He fired the shotgun into the air, a deafening roar that echoed across the valley. It wasn't a killing shot, but a warning. The man with the pistol cursed and scrambled back, his partner close behind him. They leaped onto their horses and galloped away into the darkness. The immediate threat was gone, but the fire was not. Flames were climbing the walls of the hayloft. Panic seized Arthur. The barn held his tools, his wagon, the feed that had to last him through the winter. Losing it would ruin him completely. The well, he yelled, grabbing the 2 buckets from the porch. "We need a chain." Mai didn't need to be told twice. While he ran for the well, she disappeared into the house, emerging a moment later with the skillet and then running to the water trough. She began scooping water with the heavy pan, her movements frantic but efficient, throwing it at the base of the flames. It was a pitifully small amount against the growing blaze, but she didn't stop. Arthur worked the pump handle, his muscles screaming in protest. He filled the buckets, ran to the barn, threw the water on the fire, and ran back. Again and again. The smoke burned his lungs, and the heat was blistering. Beside him, Mai was a tireless shadow, her silk dress now smudged with soot and grime, her hair falling from its pins. They worked in a desperate, unspoken rhythm, a frantic ballet of survival. Slowly, impossibly, they began to gain on it. The flames that had been roaring began to hiss and shrink. An hour later, the fire was out, leaving a smoldering, blackened hole in the side of the barn and the stench of wet ash hanging in the air. They stood side by side, leaning against the corral fence, chests heaving, bodies slick with sweat and soot. The barn was damaged, but it was still standing. They had saved it. Together. Arthur looked at Mai. Her face was streaked with black, her beautiful dress was likely ruined, but in the pale moonlight, he had never seen anyone so strong. "He will not stop," Arthur said, his voice raspy. "This is too dangerous for you. In the morning, I'm taking you to Cheyenne. I'll give you every dollar I have. You can get a train, go anywhere you want. Somewhere safe." He said it because it was the right thing to say, the responsible thing. But the thought of the house falling silent again, of the lamp in the window being dark, was a cold, hollow ache in his chest. Mai turned to him. Her eyes, even in the darkness, seemed to burn with an intensity that startled him. "You told me your name," she said. "You did not send me away. You saved my life from the fire. My place is here, Arthur." She looked from his face to the damaged barn and back again. "We saved it. This is our home now." Her words hit him with the force of a physical blow. Our home. She wasn't asking for permission. She was making a stand. In that moment, he knew he could no more send her away than he could cut out his own heart. Sending her away wouldn't keep her safe, it would only guarantee that he would lose everything alone. 6 months later, the last of the winter snows had melted, and the valley was coming alive with the pale green of new grass. The blackened scar on the side of the barn had been repaired with fresh pine, the board still smelling of sap. A wedding certificate, signed by a territorial judge in Cheyenne, lay in the top drawer of Arthur's dresser. It had been a simple, quiet affair, 2 witnesses pulled from the street, no celebration. It was a contract, a partnership made official. But it was becoming more than that. The ranch was different. It was solvent. Mai, it turned out, had a mind for numbers that was as sharp and precise as her stitching. She had gone through his chaotic mess of receipts and ledgers, organizing them into a coherent account of his debts and assets. With her clear, neat records, they had secured a loan from a proper bank in Cheyenne, paying off the high-interest notes he held with the local mercantile. For the first time in years, Arthur felt like he was standing on solid ground. Fletcher Sterling was gone. Armed with Mai's meticulous notes on the dates of the fence cuttings, the attempted arson, and a sworn statement from the freighter who had been camped down the road and witnessed the men fleeing the fire, Arthur had paid a visit to the U.S. Marshal. The investigation revealed that Sterling had been using the same tactics on 2 other small ranches, trying to consolidate the entire valley. Faced with federal charges, Sterling sold his holdings to a cattle consortium from the east and disappeared. The constant, looming threat that had shadowed Arthur's life had vanished. The house was different, too. It was filled with new sounds and smells. The scent of ginger and herbs from Mai's garden, the rhythmic thump of Bao's tail against the floorboards, the soft murmur of conversation in the evenings. Bao himself was no longer a puppy, but a lanky adolescent dog with enormous paws and an inexhaustible love for chasing rabbits. One cool spring evening, Arthur stood on the porch, watching Mai. She was not wearing silk anymore, but a practical dress of blue calico she had sewn herself. She was throwing a stick for Bao in the twilight, and her clear, bright laugh echoed in the quiet air. It was a sound he had never expected to hear, a sound that had filled all the empty spaces in his life he hadn't known were there. The advertisement he had posted in the newspaper felt like a dispatch from another man's life. He had sent for a cook. He had needed someone to handle the practical, empty business of survival. But the woman who answered the ad had taught him the difference between surviving and living. He had wanted someone to fill his kitchen. Instead, he had found the person who made the house a home. He reached out and took her hand as she came up the steps, her palm warm and familiar in his. A man can spend his whole life thinking he knows what he needs, but if he's lucky, fate provides him with what he truly wants. And that brings us to the end of this one. If you stayed with me all the way through, thank you. Stories like this one only get told because folks like you sit down and listen. If you liked what you heard, go ahead and hit that like button. And if you want more stories from the old frontier, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Until then, take care of yourself, and thanks again for being here.